All right, let's dive into a fascinating biblical puzzle. We're talking about Abraham, who was one of the wealthiest men of his time. And yet, the Bible only says he gave a tithe on one single occasion. So, why is that? We're about to unpack a really compelling theory that tries to explain this, one slide at a time.
So this is the central mystery right here. The patriarch Abraham gets massively wealthy on 4 separate occasions. But if you look at the scriptures, they only record him giving a tithe, a tenth of his assets, just once. Now, the author of our source material argues this isn't some oversight. No, they say it's actually the key to unlocking a very specific divine law.
Okay, so to get to the bottom of why he tithed just that one time, we first have to look at all 4 times he came into riches. Because as you're about to see, the context of how he got that wealth, well, it's everything.
Let's just run through them real quick. First, there was the wealth he earned through his own work back in Haran. Pretty straightforward. Second, you've got these lavish gifts from the Pharaoh of Egypt. That whole situation where he thought Abraham's wife Sarah was a sister. Third, the spoils from a major war. And fourth, more gifts, this time from King Abimelech in Gerar, who, believe it or not, makes the exact same mistake about Sarah.
Now, this is where a really crucial pattern starts to emerge. In 3 of these cases, the money he earned and the gifts from both kings, the Bible makes a point of saying Abraham worshipped God. But in those same exact moments, there is 0 mention of a tithe. He worships, but he doesn't give a tenth. And that makes that one exception so much more significant.
And that brings us to the big one, the one-time tithe. That 3rd time he got wealthy, the spoils of war, that's the exception. And the author we're following argues that this single event is what blows the whole principle wide open.
See, this wealth was a whole different ballgame. It wasn't earned through his labor, and it wasn't a personal gift. This was plunder. It was all the stuff recovered after Abraham and his allies went and defeated the kings who had just ransacked Sodom and Gomorrah and kidnapped his nephew Lot. And these spoils included everything: goods, food, even people.
And this right here, this is the pivotal moment. After this big victory, Abraham meets Melchizedek, this mysterious king and priest of Salem. It's here, and only here, that we find a reference to Abraham tithing. The verse is so direct. Then Abraham gave him a tenth of everything.
So you have to ask, what did everything include? And who got what? Well, the source material gives a super specific breakdown. It looks like 5 different groups benefited. The priest, Melchizedek, gets the tithe. That's 10% of all the goods and people. The king of Sodom gets the other 90% back. Abraham's military allies, they take a share from that 90%. His own men, they kept all the food. And Abraham? He kept absolutely nothing for himself except his rescued nephew, Lot. So if you look at the main split of all the recovered stuff, it's really stark. A clean 10% is set aside as a tithe for the priest. The huge majority, 90%, goes back to its original owner, the king of Sodom, after the allies take their cut. But here's the real kicker. Abraham himself keeps none of it.
So why this incredibly specific distribution? The author argues this wasn't just Abraham being a generous guy. No. This was him acting out the very first recorded instance of a divine principle that they call the cyclic law of tithing.
So what in the world is this cyclic law? Well, it's not about giving a tenth of your regular paycheck. The author defines it as a really special kind of tithe, one that's taken only from wealth that's gained through conflict or from righting some kind of injustice. The idea is that giving this specific tithe is what kicks off a divine cycle of justice and mercy.
But the argument goes even deeper. The claim is that this isn't just a one-off story from the Old Testament. The author sees this law as this timeless principle that just cycles through different priesthoods. It starts with the king-priest Melchizedek, then it continues with the Levitical priesthood of Aaron, and now, they argue, it's meant for what they call the order of Jesus Christ, which they interpret as a call to serve the poor and the afflicted.
And this is where it all comes home for us today. This isn't just some historical interpretation. The author uses this principle to issue a really urgent message for religious institutions and for believers right now.
And let me tell you, the warning is serious. To show just how serious, the author actually compares the famous unforgivable sin, blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, with what they call the condemnable sin of defiling this cyclic tithe. And they define that defilement as basically ignoring God's law in favor of human-made rules and doctrines. So what does this defilement actually look like in the modern world? The author argues that it happens when offerings in the church today, especially the voluntary or free will offerings, are not used to fulfill the law's original purpose, to alleviate poverty and bring justice to people who are suffering.
Okay, so after laying out this really stark warning, the author proposes one primary path forward for believers. One way to correctly follow this principle and, as they put it, enter into the kingdom. And that brings us to the final section, the author's direct call to action. It spells out exactly what they believe is the only right way to respond once you understand this law. The path forward, according to the author, involves 4 clear steps. It's a call to turn away from confusing man-made doctrines and from unfaithfulness. The journey, as they lay it out, is all about being reconciled with God, and ultimately about becoming Christ-like in your actions and in your spirit. And really, this whole deep dive, this entire argument, it all comes down to the author's final, very provocative question. Are the flawless and eternal laws of God being set aside for the doctrines and regulations of mortal men? It's a challenge that takes a really familiar story and reframes it to deliver a powerful, and for some, a pretty controversial message for today.